Hi guys, it's Claire. Welcome back. Today I am super excited to be talking about my Victober TBR for 2018. In case you don't already know, Victober is a month-long readathon hosted by Katie over at Books and Things, along with 3 other great booktubers who I'll link down below. And the goal is to basically read as much Victorian literature as possible throughout the month of October. It's pretty self-explanatory. And I have very fond feelings for Victober because last year it was the very first booktube readathon event that I ever participated in, and it was also the readathon that got me to finally pick up Middlemarch, which was just a joy to read and ended up becoming one of my favorite books of the year. So sidebar, if you've ever thought about reading Middlemarch, I really encourage you to give it a go this Victober. It's one of those books that I really wish I could experience again for the first time. And because I loved Middlemarch so much last year, the first book on my Victober TBR for this year is The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot. Not that you can really tell. I don't actually know much about the plot of this book, although I'm pretty sure I looked up the ending on Wikipedia at some point, but I did find this copy in a used bookstore last year, so I thought it would be my next George Eliot. Next up, I have Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. I love Jane Eyre, and Villette is one of my favorite books of all time, so I thought I would try reading another Charlotte Bronte novel. She only wrote 4, and although this one doesn't get a ton of love, it does sound better than The Professor, which seems to be her least loved of the 4 novels. Again, I don't know much about the plot of this book. I apologize. This is why I don't make TBRs that often, so I'm completely relying on Charlotte Bronte's reputation for this one, although I did read that it does not feature the first-person narration that is so distinct in Jane Eyre and Villette, so that alone should be pretty interesting. Then I have The Life of Charlotte Bronte by Elizabeth Gaskell, which was published a couple years after Charlotte Bronte's untimely death in 1855. And in addition to being a fellow Victorian writer, Elizabeth Gaskell was actually pretty good friends with Charlotte Bronte. So I've read that this book sometimes has a certain intimacy and frankness to it because of the relationship between Gaskell and Bronte, but for that same reason, I've also read that Gaskell censored certain aspects of Charlotte's personal life that she thought would be scandalous or inappropriate for Victorian readers. This book is also often credited with establishing some of the Bronte family mythology that remains so well known today, especially as it regards Charlotte's eccentric father Patrick and the downward spiral of her opium-addicted brother Branwell. So this should be really interesting as a biography, but also as a sort of historical artifact. And then my last 2 picks are carried over from last year's TBR, and those are The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte and North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. Will Anne Bronte ever get her due? Probably not this year, if I'm being totally honest, although I do hope to get to North and South on audiobook. I was actually supposed to read this as a buddy read with Matthew Sharapa and Amy Poole last month, but I went camping and missed the whole buddy read, so it would be great to catch up on that. If I'm being honest, I read Wives and Daughters for Victober last year, and I wasn't as crazy about it as everyone else seems to be, so I'm not sure what my reaction to North and South will be, but I'm still pretty curious about it, and I'm always down to try out an angsty industrial romance. So we'll see. And in case you are wondering, there are indeed 5 challenges for Victober this year. I compiled my TBR without looking at them, but now in retrospect, I realized that I could potentially fulfill 4 of the 5 prompts. The first challenge is to read a book by one of the host's favorite Victorian authors. Charlotte Bronte and Elizabeth Gaskell are both on the list. The second challenge is to read a Victorian novel with a proper noun in the name. So The Life of Charlotte Bronte and Shirley would both fulfill that prompt, and also I guess The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Prompt 3 is to read a book from the first 10 years of the Victorian period or from the last 10 years of the Victorian era, and unfortunately I don't have a book that meets that criteria. But prompt 4 is to read a book that was published anonymously or under a pseudonym, so The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, The Mill on the Floss, and Shirley would all meet that prompt. And then the last one is to read a Victorian novel and then watch a screen adaptation of it. So I could read North and South and then watch the miniseries, which is currently on Netflix. Anyway, that's what I'm planning to read for Victober this year. I'm hoping to get through at least 2 of those books, but let me know what you're planning to read if you're participating, and if you've read any of the books I mentioned, I would love to hear your thoughts about those as well. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!